All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Money Talks. This is the Great Bitcoin Roundtable. I'm broadcasting live from Austin for the South by Southwest conference. I'm actually not alone today. We've got an awesome roundtable set up here. We're going to get into it in a minute. I know a lot of you are posting messages on the live stream. I was looking before we went on. We're probably not going to do full AMA today. We may take some questions here live. We've got an audience here at the Arrive Hotel in beautiful Austin, although it's freezing outside. And we're going to talk all things Bitcoin today, so we're going to be completely focused on Bitcoin. So if you do have Bitcoin questions, you can go to the live stream on Twitter, on Facebook, Twitch, tee them up, and we'll try to get to them as we go. But let's get right to it. So we've got an awesome group of friends here who've graciously agreed to give us a couple hours of their time before and after so that we could get into this. We've got Peter McCormack, Natalie, Brunell, who those of you who watch Money Talks all know, our Bitcoin analyst, and Dan Held, who I've known for many, many years, since we go way back, since the beginning. And Dan runs growth for Kraken. So Peter has, who all of you know from What Bitcoin Did, and I was on Peter's podcast a couple of weeks ago. Peter has agreed to kind of act as a moderator, even though we're going to make this a bit of a roundtable back and forth discussion today. We're going to get into everything macro. Obviously, everybody wants to talk about inflation, Ukraine, et cetera, et cetera. So where do you want to go first?
Well, I think a really interesting place to start first is whether it's us here or here in the audience or watching online, everyone's been involved in Bitcoin for a different length of time and had different kind of expectations of where it would go. And in the last 2 years, we've gone from a president being cancelled on social media to a group of protesters having their contributions blocked by the state to being blocked from the financial system, now to a country being cancelled. And every step of the way, every major news story at the moment seems to have a Bitcoin angle. Mm-hmm. Bitcoin seems to be able to offer a lifeboat to everyone in one of these situations. So really just a broad question to start with, Bill, is, and to everyone else, is like, what do you make of all this? Because it's kind of wild times.
Oh, God. Go ahead.
Yeah. It's a very heavy topic to start with.
Yeah.
I would say, Bitcoin was built during the Bitcoin was launched during the 2008 financial crisis to solve the problem of trust with authority, trust with banks, trust with government. And so Satoshi architected every piece of Bitcoin to be decentralized and to promote and to have decentralization woven through it so it could preserve these values that allow it to be trustless. We don't have to trust anyone. We don't have to trust any authority figure. And so in these moments when we start to critically examine our authorities around us, whether it be in geopolitical battles in Europe or in local battles in Canada, these are moments when we go, wait a second, we need a money that isn't issued by our government. And so Bitcoin's a very topical solution for that problem.
There was many people know this, but inside the Genesis block for Bitcoin, there was a message that was hard-coded. It effectively said, the chancellor on brink of second bailout. And this isn't from last year, this is from 2010. So it was almost like preparation for the next version of that at the time, which is incredibly prescient for where we are now. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that the world events are a massive commercial for Bitcoin right now in so many ways, because it's really highlighting the different use cases. I mean, the fact that we had a democratic nation in Canada basically freezing average citizens' accounts because they donated, $50 to a crowdfunding platform, that was shocking. And then now we move over to Eastern Europe and this geopolitical crisis playing out that has so many aspects of Bitcoin woven into it. Everything from, Bitcoiners pushing for nuclear power and really analyzing, where our money has gone in terms of energy infrastructure, to just the fact that you can now help Ukrainian refugees instantly through the Lightning Network, or settled through the Bitcoin network in under 10 minutes directly. And I feel so bad for the citizens of Russia who oppose the war, who are now getting every kind of business shut off from them. But the one thing they still do have access to is Bitcoin. They might not be able to use Visa or MasterCard or be able to go to the grocery store and pay for things the way they could. But if they have Bitcoin, then they can still transact with each other. So I just think it's highlighting all of these amazing benefits and features of Bitcoin.
Yeah, well, they're also not getting their hospitals bombed. I mean, just awful. I mean, I think what's interesting to me about the question is I think there's a great convergence happening. And I don't know if it's all happening for a reason at the same time. I feel like, and I've made this point many times, that we reached pinnacle centralization in 1969 with the moon landing, and we've been in a massive movement towards decentralization ever since. So what's special about now? Well, what's special about now is it's the first time that we've doubled the money supply in less than a year, like all of it. Right, all of it. I mean, it literally is like going on Amazon when you're playing Monopoly and saying, oh, we don't have enough money because more people are going to play, so I'm just going to go buy some on Amazon. That's basically what the government did. But at the same time, we have hard money now. At the same time, everybody has a smartphone. At the same time, we have this cancel culture where you can actually cancel a country.
A whole country.
A whole fucking country. It's just been canceled. And as you said, there's Russians protesting in the streets who actually think Putin is evil, and like me would agree that the world will be a much better place when he departs this earth. But there's nothing that they can do about it except get shot in the head, for basically trying to overthrow the government.
Well, Facebook agree with you on that point now.
Exactly. You can actually say that apparently online, whereas you couldn't before. So we've uncanceled a few people and in response canceled the whole country. So, I mean, it's this convergence. It seems like the theme to me of all these things coming together, where I was at the Tony Robbins Platinum event where Paul Tudor Jones and all the muckety mucks get together and talk about how they're going to carve up the money better amongst themselves in the future, and they're scared because they believe that we're 5 to 10 years away of this all being over, like meaning there's going to be a great reset.
Yeah.
And they don't know what's going to happen, but they know it's coming, and they don't know, just like all of us. They don't know what to do about it.
Well, there's two versions of the Great Reset. There's a Great Reset that governments imagine, that the World Economic Forum imagines, and then there's a Great Reset that we know is going to happen.
Right.
Yeah, it's really more of like a authority and government reset versus a people's reset. And I think that's what Bitcoin represents, is a people's reset. It's ultimately freedom money, freedom to do whatever you'd like with it. And I think when we look at censorship in these wars, as someone highlighted, the Russian citizens aren't responsible for the war, Putin is. But they're being punished for it. And same with Ukraine. And so Bitcoin's a money for both sides, left and right, Ukraine and Russia. And it's that neutrality that I think is really, really cool and really, really on point now, where you can get canceled for the smallest of things. You can be canceled because you're Russian. You can be canceled because something historically wasn't okay. But I don't want to go down that rabbit hole too deeply, but that's what I love about Bitcoin, is its neutrality. It's a Switzerland of money.
It doesn't care about any of us. It just is.
Exactly.
But that's a really interesting point, Dan, because we're currently in a super polarized world right now. On every single issue, there seems to be discussed in public. There seems to be two sides. We've been split by media. We've been split by the politicians. But actually, you've just made a great point there. Whether you're a Ukrainian fleeing one of their cities that's being bombed, or you're a Russian suffering from the implications of the mass cancelling, you can both lean into Bitcoin as a way to protect yourself. And that's like one of the things I hope is that this is one of the things that starts to bring people back together and bring humanity back together.
Yeah. I know we need one thing to unite us, because I completely agree with you. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I was feeling so jaded in my career as a reporter over the latter part of the decade that I did my work, is because the country was becoming so divided and there's so much infighting, and you have to pick a team and it has to be one or the other. You can't have anything in the middle, and everyone just needs someone to blame. Well, meanwhile, the problem with that, and the reason I think it's happening, is because no one's connecting the dots except for Bitcoiners, saying the money is what's broken, the money is the problem, the centralization is the problem, and now here's the fix that you will appreciate because you understand the problem. And another thing that I've been thinking about with the whole Russia-Ukraine crisis is just Bitcoiners have been talking for a long time about the idea of Bitcoin being a pristine, has the pristine potential to become a global reserve asset or global reserve currency. And we've been criticizing what the US has done, weakening the dollar and depreciating the dollar over these past few decades. But I think this whole crisis puts a bigger spotlight on that, because countries have been de-dollarizing. They don't trust the US dollar. They want out of the system. I tweeted, I think yesterday, Putin said in 2011 that the US acts like a parasite on the global economy through its monopoly on the dollar. And I think that nobody was expecting this, yet he's been planning it for many, many years. And I think it really— I think
he's coming for you.
I think it really does put a spotlight on the strength of America being based on the dollar is weakening, and it's in jeopardy.
Yeah.
Well, China made what many of us believe was one of the biggest or largest geopolitical mistakes by banning Bitcoin and the mining infrastructure essentially migrating to other parts of the world, large parts of it here. It feels like the US has kind of made a similar one with the dollar over the last few weeks by cancelling Russia. They've essentially removed that risk-free nature of treasury bills, and no longer are they a global store of value. Jerome Powell said we could expect multiple different reserve currencies now. China is obviously putting itself in the mix, but really the stage is set now for Bitcoin to grow. Now, it's not going to get there, right? I expect to see more nations. I was literally just got off the phone with Lynn Alden. She says she expects people to be moving, countries to be realizing they need to increase their gold reserves.
Yeah.
Right.
But she said they might also be like, well, we should have a small allocation there, and it will start with the sovereign wealth funds.
But do the game theory, right? So if China was still buying our debt, which they don't want anymore, and they had threatened to stop buying the debt because of U.S. sanctions in Russia, I'm guessing it wouldn't have been as deep, as strong, as kind of cancel culture-ish as it was, right? If we were still dependent upon China effectively backdooring the funding of the petrodollar, because they're not buying it anymore, because it's effectively the Fed that is the buyer of last resort, pretty much the only buyer now. I think they basically said, hey, we have nothing to lose here, right? I mean, isolating Putin and his government actually costs us nothing because we created rampant inflation anyway.
Right.
Right? The gasoline was going to be $5 a gallon this summer, whether we isolated Russia or not.
Yeah.
I think they did the game theory on that.
Well, and what's frustrating is now we have politicians who just can't be honest about anything, right? Because first it was inflation is transitory, then it's good for us, then it's the corporation's fault, now it's Putin's fault. They always have someone to blame, even though, February's numbers came in and were published just now. Putin didn't invade in February. You know, it's like...
It's Elizabeth Warren's fault. Everyone can blame her.
Exactly. So one point on that. I was at with my teams over there. We were at a conference in January talking to all the institutional investors who do alternative asset allocation. ESG was a topic for every single discussion. What happened? In 2 weeks, the letters E, S, and G have been removed from the alphabet. What happened?
I was going to bring this up. I mean, it's so crazy to see them flip-flop from like natural gas and oil are bad to it's our sovereign right and for freedom to go get oil and gas. I mean, the ESG narrative in general is completely political.
Of course.
Because it can be assigned to anything where nuclear is clearly, and sorry, that's my Texas accent there, nuclear energy is clearly the solution here based on physics. There is undeniably this is the solution, but politically nuclear wasn't a very popular option for a long time.
It's still not, but it's at least it can be, the words can be said now.
People are talking about it because they're like, wait a second, we just shot ourselves in the foot, like Germany.
Right.
They shut down all their nuclear power plants, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh no, why are we dependent on Putin? It's like, I don't know, physics? So it's the ESG narrative has never really been about ESG. It's been about exerting political control over various elements of society and the economy. And energy being, everything requires energy. So then that gives someone the ability to politically assign narratives to every type of energy consumption, and they can lean in on different areas. So I think it's just bizarre to see people shift back over to natural gas and oil.
I don't know how much you all dug into this, but there was rumblings that the European Parliament was going to introduce legislation to effectively ban proof of work mining.
Yeah, I saw that,
right?
yeah.
I mean, what the fuck? I mean, like, how dumb
we should
can
ban gaming.
Be? Right.
I believe games are a waste of time. We should all be productive.
Well, didn't China do that? Didn't they actually say you're only allowed to play
2 hours a day or something?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't know how well it's enforced, but it's what's funny about the energy consumption argument about Bitcoin, I guess that's a good pivot to that, of when people criticize Bitcoin's energy consumption is that they believe that it's wasteful. Well, people are free to use their energy however they like. They can watch the Kardashians. They can wash their clothes 5 times. We wouldn't criticize someone for doing those things.
Right.
Similarly with Bitcoin's proof of work mining, it's doing something that we believe is useful and therefore a useful use of energy.
Right.
But the people who are against proof of work, do you think they're really against proof of work?
Yeah, they're definitely not, and that's where...
No, they don't understand what proof of work means.
Yeah, but they also have usually an agenda against Bitcoin. So Elizabeth Warren will flip from proof of work, she'll flip to now Putin will use it to avoid sanctions.
Right.
She's just decided she doesn't like Bitcoin, probably because it's something they can't control.
But she's in that camp with the finance committee where there's 3 or 4 of them. Whereas if there was an off switch, they would have already flipped it. And they know, I think they recognize now that there is no off switch on this. And so they basically have to kind of have a circular discussion with their crowd on the FUD because they don't know what else to do at this point. I mean, there's nothing else they can do.
Well, it comes, is another interesting area of this is these second order effects of Bitcoin, which would never have been planned by Satoshi, in that there's now a defense of proof of work, and the Bitcoin mining is what it can do to stabilize energy grids, because you need this oversupply, and who can take up the slack? We've talked about this, Dan.
Yeah, in fact, in Texas has had periods where it gets really cold, and Texas had an energy problem where there was too much demand and less supply. With Bitcoin miners, they can enter into contract where Bitcoin miners use demand or use supply when it's available, but in high peak demand times, they can just turn off the Bitcoin miners. And that allows the grid to stabilize because it's always a supply-demand problem.
Right.
You know, the local areas don't want to build too much power for a small population because that's very wasteful and very expensive. Right. So you always want to keep a certain amount of availability online. And Bitcoin miners act as an easy off switch they can easily do to decrease the amount of demand and then allow all the others to use it.
I was having a conversation with one of the investors, I won't pick on them, in this conference I mentioned, and they were asking about ESG and proof of work mining and how bad it is. And I made the point, I said, well, you understand that energy is actually not stored on the grid. It's actually created and transmitted, right? And it's not like we have these big buckets that we put energy into and then plug into them later, right? That's not how it works, right? And I go like kind of blank stares, right? Like, you know, literally the vast majority of energy that gets created in this country is wasted.
Yep.
Totally. And nobody understands that. Yeah. Now Bitcoin didn't create that problem. The problem preceded Bitcoin. Anyway, I don't know how much time you guys want to spend on this. I could talk, you know, all day on Bitcoin energy consumption, but
I just want to say something random on that note, because I feel like Bitcoiners and especially those involved in the mining industry, it's like they do whatever they can to help the community, and not only do they provide jobs, they capture stranded energy. I mean, it's just there's so many beneficial factors to the industry. But also, I was talking to someone at one of the conferences I went to, and they said something that really stuck with me. They said, in this world, like think of outside Bitcoiners, how many people are givers versus takers? Like what percentage of people? And we kind of thought like 85% of people are probably takers, maybe like 10 to 15 are givers. In the Bitcoin, think of it. I would say most people are givers. They want to help. They want to contribute to society. Yeah. And like, I just think it's interesting when you think about like the mentality breakdown, the common good that we sort of forget about nowadays because everything's gotten so polarized and political. And I think Bitcoiners are always trying to step in to help.
Yep.
Just a random note, but
yeah.
I was with Matthew Pines yesterday from the Bitcoin Policy Institute, which I recommend everyone checks out because there's some smart people in there. Margot Paez is involved, David Zell, and Troy Cross. And he wrote it's like a 50-page paper on, I can't remember the title, but it's about Bitcoin, why Bitcoin's important for national defense. And he started looking into, where politicians have traditionally wanted to hate Bitcoin because it's something they can't control. There's all these second-order effects. We've just talked about mining now, but we also have an issue, well, the world has an issue and the US potentially has an issue with regards to semiconductors. But now there's a new incentive, not just stabilizing grids with mining, but now there's an incentive to have a foundry here in the US because there's a semiconductor requirement, and mining is another thing that can drive that. So I think, firstly, I recommend checking that out, but I'm so fascinated by all these other second-order effects that we don't know are coming. Mm-hmm. Nobody, I believe, 4 years ago thought, mining is going to stabilize the mm-hmm. Texas grid. Mining is going to drive the requirement for a new foundry, which is going to protect the risk of having most of the semiconductors produced in Taiwan. I wish I could predict what they are, but that's a real fascinating part of this, is that Bitcoin has become this kind of animal that does so much more beyond just peer-to-peer transactions.
Yeah. I have this theory that most proof-of-work mining will be absorbed into the utilities themselves and moved right to the edge of their networks, because it simply makes the most sense for them and they can be the most efficient at providing it, right? So today, you have to be able to set up these massive warehouses with millions and millions of CPUs, And that's always going to be true, but that's going to get easier and easier. I think access to the grid itself is going to be the challenge, and I think that's going to basically, to your example about what happened in Texas, going to show a lot of governments, hey, we can integrate this directly into the grid. We can arbitrage the usage of electricity. We can compete. We can basically create a reserve for ourselves, and even if we don't touch it and just leave it there. And we earn a couple of hundred Bitcoin in a year, which at some point is going to be worth billions of dollars. It seems to make a lot of sense, especially for the public utilities that don't know how to compete globally.
So the way banks are getting interested in Bitcoin and exchanges are becoming banks, energy companies might become miners, and miners might start acquiring energy companies.
Yeah, I do believe that I don't know which way it's going to go. I think the ones that are acquirable will be acquired by miners. I think it's more likely to happen the other way around because of the government's blocking that happening. But they are definitely going to merge. I mean, I shouldn't say definitely. I foresee that you're going to start to see that merging happening, not dissimilar to how I've told you that I think the banks are going to start acquiring crypto companies, although it's actually going to, on paper, going to be the other way around because the crypto companies are going to be worth more than the banks.
It starts to create a protection against over-regulation as well, because it's such an important industry.
Well, the more decentralized it is across a global grid, the better off we all are.
I mean, and as ownership penetration becomes very large, we're talking 10, 20, 30% of the population, right. Bitcoin becomes a political thing.
How many volcanoes are there?
You can be Senator Warren, but she actually doesn't, I don't think she actually hates Bitcoin or crypto.
She hates herself.
She uses it to get votes. That's why she hates on it. She doesn't actually know anything about it.
Yeah.
She just has. She probably doesn't even write her tweets. I mean, look, she's like 1,000 years old. She has someone else write it,
right?
And then she has advisors. She has probably no idea how any of it works. Nor does she understand how the existing financial system works.
Yeah.
But it gets her votes. By clanging that bell, everyone's like, "Oh yeah, that sounds bad. I'm with you." Bitcoin could, we're at I think 10% U.S. Adult adoption of Bitcoin or ownership. If that reaches 25% or 30%, that's a big voter block.
It was 14%.
40 million.
It was in the infrastructure bill this week.
It was 14%.
14%?
Yeah. I mean, if you do the math on the popular votes, on the number of electoral votes that were decided on less than 200,000 votes, Bitcoin and crypto in general moves any election that it wants to from now on. Because I've yet to see as any other topic, except maybe the environment with a smaller subset of the population, that generates more single issue voters right now than this topic. Now, it may seem like craziness to those who aren't single issue voters, and that's a lot of what a lot of my friends say, but it doesn't change the fact that the number of single issue voters on this topic is growing at an astounding rate. And I think there's going to be a whole meme hashtag thing, in the next presidential election around this whole single issue voting thing.
Well, politicians are using it as a hack as well. Whether you believe or not they care about Bitcoin, they've recognized the hack.
Sure.
Which most of them are hack jobs anyway. We recognized it. We've had at least 8 people who are running for Congress reach out and say, "Can we come on the podcast?"
Yeah. Oh,
and it's
I get the same thing.
Oh, you
Yeah.
you never let the.
No, we've
So if Ted Cruz asked to come on, would you let him on?
that's different.
Yeah.
But we did Erika Rose because she's
Yeah.
cool, she's interesting, and I am talking to Josh Mandel, and I did speak to Morgan Harper, but every one of those interviews is the same. They want to talk about the same stuff. Of course, Ted Cruz is entirely different.
But he's been, I was never, I don't know a lot about him. I'm never a big Ted Cruz fan, but he's been masterful at basically embracing this topic to his benefit. I think, if anything, he learned from Bukele that, hey, if I embrace this topic, I'm going to get a big audience.
But he gets it as well.
He gets it.
No,
yeah.
I'm not saying he doesn't. I'm just saying, he did figure out from a political perspective, there's a large audience to be had here.
Well, I will say, though, I think we as voters have to be very careful because now politicians do know that it's a buzzword and it's trendy and it's, on brand with especially younger voters. And not all of them, even though they say they're Bitcoiners, clearly understand it because we had Eric Adams in New York City saying, I'm for Bitcoin, but not for Bitcoin mining. It's like, well, that makes no sense.
That's absolutely.
So I think we need to be really careful and ask the right questions of these folks because, I'm getting messages too. It's like, I want to come on the show. I want this. I'm a Bitcoiner. But that's not enough. To say you're a Bitcoiner is not enough. You have to proof of work, show your knowledge.
But a lot of people don't understand the distinction you're making. I mean, you're deep into this. You get it. But I would venture a guess that the vast majority of people that own Bitcoin don't understand the nuance of what you're saying. And that's dangerous.
Yep.
And I do want to give a shout out to the Unchained Capital folks and the Texas Blockchain Council folks who probably orange-pilled Ted Cruz. If I were to
Really?
assume who orange-pilled him, it's probably
That's awesome.
those two.
Wow.
Good for
They
them.
do a lot of great
Lee
advocacy
Bratcher.
work. Lee Bratcher from Texas Blockchain Council.
Okay.
I mean, they've essentially orange pilled the state.
Yeah, both.
Is that
of
true?
them.
I don't know. We got an audience here. You all been orange pilled?
They have done a great job of advocating
Get
for
these people
Bitcoin
some coffee.
in Texas. So I lived here 8 months, and I can see their work everywhere.
Yeah.
So I just want to give them a shout out because they've done a great job. Because Ted Cruz is like an incredible champion for Bitcoin now.
Yeah.
I'm
Shocking.
in the same
How-
camp with Bill. I'm not like a buddy of his. I don't follow him. I don't look up to him, but I think it's cool that he's into it.
Well, go ahead.
I think the direction we're going into is seeing, like, based on which states are more friendly and accepting, we're going to see the attention going from like the federal level really to, I'm going to go where this is accepted. I'm going to go where I can flourish, where my business will flourish, and
Yeah.
I think people will choose locations based on Bitcoin as well.
Yeah, lots of grassroots movements. The one thing that he said first that really got my attention, before he even really tried to promote Bitcoin in any way, and I actually got calls from the press when I retweeted this, like, Bill, why are you retweeting Ted Cruz? Was he basically had a video that went viral which said, why are we trying to regulate something we don't understand? I have never in my life heard a senator in a less than self-serving way say, why are we trying to regulate something we don't understand? That was shocking.
That's incredible
To me. So
Should we talk about inflation?
let's
Yes.
happier topics.
CPI figures came in, 40-year high,
Yeah.
7.9%. Referring back to speaking to Lynn earlier, she was like, these figures don't include what's been happening over these last 2 weeks.
Well, they also don't include a whole bunch of
Right.
staples,
Well, yeah.
which is just makes CPI bullshit in the first place.
Yeah, so even at a bullshit number, even not including the massive increases in gas prices, which I just want to say, when you're complaining about $5 gas prices,
They're 10.
It's £2 a litre.
UK.
in
Yeah, but
gas.
that's because it's
It's $10.
taxes. That's taxes.
But just be aware where it counts.
Okay, but you need
cost me double to fill
you
up
need
my
to
car.
complain to your government about saying you need to tax other forms of consumption to distribute the load.
They tax everything.
Yeah, I
Okay,
understand
gas
that.
prices are high.
But every
Yes.
but there's a reality to this. Commodities are up, and
Absolutely.
I was with Nicardo the other day, and he said the problem is when commodities are up, when gas prices are up, he said humans flourish when commodities are cheap, and now they're high. They're very high, and there's a lot of people who can't right now defend themselves with Bitcoin. The defense was a year ago when we were all talking about this. So, I mean, how are you taking it on?
I mean, I just paid $6.50 for a tea latte at the shop around the corner.
We were all just talking about real estate and how much your property went up.
I don't even know. Yeah, it's incredible. You know, this whole what are they, the 8% number, whatever it is. It doesn't reflect any semblance of reality that I've seen.
It removes energy.
If you're in the middle class or above, it kind of well, you can actually work your way down. If you're in like the upper echelons of income, you've probably seen a 30 to 40% increase in the cost of living. And if you're at the bottom of the income pyramid in the United States, you've probably seen like a 10% increase in the cost of living. And that's because a lot of things simply haven't caught up because maybe you're in rent control and they want to increase but they can't. And basically you can interpolate in between so that the middle class is probably experiencing something around 20 to 22, 23% based on our calculations increase in the cost of living over the last year alone. So if you have $100,000 in savings, at the end of the year, that savings is worth $75,000 if you do nothing.
Yeah.
Think about that for a second.
Yeah, this really concerns me because I think that right now we're basically headed for a recession, and we've all kind of said it before, I think, as we do public commentary or on Twitter. The Fed is between a rock and a hard place. I mean, if they were to really fight inflation, they would have to hike interest rates so much that it would unwind all the credit and collapse the economy.
Of course.
But if we keep doing this, I mean, what, gas is going to be $10, $15? At what point will people like start to riot and go out in the streets? Because clearly it hasn't happened yet. I watched a video yesterday where people, someone was going to gas stations and interviewing people, and I was shocked because some of the people were angry and upset, but just kind of felt like, complete, like, this is what I just have to do. I have to do what I can, there's nothing I can do to fix it. Other people were saying, this is the price we have to pay for Russia, so I'm okay with it. I'm okay paying extra. And I was like,
They've been gaslighted.
it's like, it's the brainwashing. It's like, no one thinks that there's anything they can do.
Well, Biden said that the inflation numbers were high in February because of the effects, partially because of the effects of the Russian sanctions, but the Russian sanctions weren't initiated until March. So I'm like, dude, what the hell?
The bigger question here is, how do we fight this narrative? We all create content in the space. We all build products in the space. How do we fight these narratives? Because it's so hard to dislodge people's trust with the government.
I don't know. I think the public's getting wise to the politics of this. It's very hard to trust people who look you in the eye and constantly say, oh, it's temporary, it's transitory, whatever this BS word is, it's good for you, yeah. I don't think there are a lot of people who buy that anymore. I think the more important narrative to me now is, what is it going to be replaced with, and what does the education of the public look like? You can't print 2.5x the money supply in 18 months and expect the money that you already had to not be worth a whole lot less. Right. And I know my team is sick of hearing it, but I use the baseball card analogy over and over again. I don't know if anybody here collects baseball cards. I'm a Yankees fan. I'm from New York City. And I had a whole bunch of really expensive baseball cards. And if you go to a trade show and you try to sell those baseball cards and they tell you that the card is worth $10,000 and you find out like the next day that there are another million of that card, it stands to reason that it's not going to be worth $10,000 anymore. It's going to be worth almost nothing. That's what we're doing with the money. We keep finding millions more of those baseball cards in shoeboxes as dollar bills and don't expect that the value of what we have is going down. It's insanity.
I know, but you say that like people are, waking up to it, but yeah, the Bitcoin price is so choppy. I mean, these inflation numbers.
Well, wait a minute. So Bitcoin was at 3,000.
I know.
At the beginning of COVID, and it's at 40,000 now. So I mean, let's look at a few examples, right? So
you get in the lifeboat early.
Yeah. Well, okay, but you're dealing with the network effects of an exponentially growing technology in terms of adoption. Nothing in human history has been adopted faster. If you look at some comparables, right, go back and look at Amazon from 97 to now, and if you actually look at on a log chart, multiple 60% pullbacks. But if you look on a log chart, the price looks like this. That's exactly what's happening now. Look at Apple during the iPhone to the latest run-up. It looks like this with multiple 30, 40, 50% pullbacks. That's what happens when you're dealing with exponential technology growth. It's volatile. And this is worse because it trades 24/7. There's unregulated futures markets, et cetera, et cetera. But I see no reason, because of the same adoption curve, that over that 25, 30 years, that same chart is not going to look the same. So I wouldn't say, like, yes, it's choppy right now, but I still think that, when you zoom out, it still looks like that's where we're going.
And Peter and I were just talking about this. I'm a marketer by profession. So when we think about the marketing funnel,
we forgive you.
Thanks. Yeah. We've got awareness, consideration, and various steps of people being aware of a product, like being aware of Coca-Cola, considering buying a Coke, and then buying a Coke. So that's like the marketing funnel, and that's how marketers think about professional marketing. And so when I think about Bitcoin's marketing funnel, we've got like acquisition moment would be when people buy Bitcoin for the first time, and then retention would be hodling Bitcoin. But the top of that funnel is awareness and consideration, and the awareness level of Bitcoin is massive. Everyone knows the word Bitcoin. Everyone knows what Bitcoin is. Now, considering Bitcoin, some people are trickling down into that layer where they go, okay, I might consider buying Bitcoin. So we've got the pump primed for almost, like I'd say, billions of people who are aware of Bitcoin to then enter those next stages of the marketing funnel to eventually convert to buying Bitcoin. So Bitcoin's price, I think, will eventually reflect all of those people moving through that funnel here.
Yep.
And so there could be some catalyst moments like Ukraine, like Canada, that start to bring people down to the lower levels.
I think it's going to evolve to be a tale of two cities. We were talking about this, Natalie, before we went on air about what the work you're doing in El Salvador and the other places, where I think that if you take the GDP of the countries where this matters like a lot right now, when we talk about El Salvador, you talk about Ukraine, you talk about Venezuela, if every single one of the people in those countries put 100% of their savings into Bitcoin right now, it wouldn't move the price. It would not. Okay, there's just not enough money in those countries. So when I say tale of two cities, I think you're going to see Bitcoin being used as the backbone for a kind of an insurance policy for the global monetary system first, which in and of itself is not going to move the price of Bitcoin. But at the same time, we're seeing a tremendous amount of institutional interest that we didn't see last year during the last run-up. Right? Everybody was talking about the institutional money driving the price of Bitcoin. That's not what was happening. It was basically traders and high net worth money taking advantage of grayscale and a bunch of other things that was driving the price higher. Now we're seeing the institutional interest. So now you have the convergence of what you're seeing in El Salvador and the institutional interest happening at the same time, which is a perfect storm for what you've called what is the phrase you use? Hyper
super cycle.
Super cycle.
Yeah, I mean, the super cycle is basically that this Bitcoin cycle is different than all the other ones. That when we look at Bitcoin's possibility of price appreciation, when the world has moments like these where they start to question their government, they start to question the nature of reality. They, the Matrix, they've woken up from the fiat system and they see the Bitcoin system. The price of Bitcoin isn't going to just go up 5x or 4x. It's going to go up like 100x or something like that. Now, who knows if that will happen and who knows when, but the stage is set for that to be a possibility. Because there's never been a moment that I've seen in Bitcoin's history where there's been more geopolitical crisis and crisis of confidence in authorities in fiat money.
But I almost feel like there needs to be some sort of, just like an eruption of the old system collapsing for everyone to jump on to the Bitcoin boat and for it to be a hockey stick. And I feel like we could be at the precipice of that with just how bad things are in terms of our economic growth slowing, inflation running hot, the Fed has to do something, and I think that they're going to try to turn the dial down by dimming it, but it could end up being a light switch where it all just crumbles. So I'm kind of curious, what do you guys think is going to happen? Because obviously you have inflation in one direction or a bust in the other.
I think we should be conscious of the risks of a too quick a transition from a fiat-based economy to a Bitcoin economy. I think that would bring mass instability.
Totally.
Instability of prices.
Well, it's not realistic anyway.
No, it isn't. But we should be conscious of that transition anyway.
Yeah.
We've not lived in a world which has a Bitcoin standard, which has an asset like that that backs people, which is a globally traded asset that can be teleported around the world instantly. We haven't had that level up, and my expectation is that a transition to that. We should be conscious of the political upheaval, the changes in wealth structure, and the potential for it being a bloody transition.
So Ray Dalio published a video, and you should really go watch it. It's a 20-minute video that he published on YouTube about the changing world order. It's kind of a summary of the main points of his latest book, and he basically shows these kind of intersecting sine wave curves of peak centralization in different societies, and those sine waves, the peak is after about 40 years, and you get these kind of 70 to 90 year cycles where you go from the Ottoman Empire, British Empire, American Empire, and now clearly we're on the verge of potentially a Chinese empire, and you kind of get a feel for why this keeps happening over and over again. And the ugly part of this, which you and I talked about a couple of weeks ago on your show, is that this doesn't end well. Historically, right? Yeah. These kind of the down cycle that we're in results in massive money printing. We did not invent this. The United States did not invent this idea. There is a playbook for this.
Right.
This has happened since the fall of the Roman Empire. It's happened over and over and over again. Right? If you go back to 1976, I think it was, the seminal work on private money was published. Please go read it. Before the internet, before Bitcoin, it talked about what would happen if we could get the government out of this business of printing money in late stage debt cycles. If you couldn't do that, you would have hard money. There would probably be no more wars, which would prevent these cycles from happening in the first place, because these cycles are funded by the bond markets. That's the irony of this, is China buys our debt for 20 years, realizes the debt is worthless, doesn't buy any more. They're left holding the bag. We start fighting over islands nobody's ever heard of in the South China Sea, and the next thing you know, somebody's invoking Article 5 and it's World War again.
Yeah.
Is there a chance that a hard money asset coming out of this cycle could give the world a global insurance policy at least. And I think my point is that's the answer, I think, to your question is that if we start looking at this as a global insurance policy, that regardless of what happens next, and I think the fight is going to be over China's central bank digital currency versus ours from a political perspective, not for us, but from a political perspective. If everybody knows that there's a global insurance policy that's decentralized, has no off switch, is not manipulatable, is immutable, that basically says, now we have our eye on you, and we mean it this time, right? We've never, in the hundreds of years of these cycles, that's the one thing we've never had. We've always trusted the government. Oh, yeah, Bretton Woods, this much gold is equal to this many dollars, we got you, right? Well, the only reason we keep believing that over and over is we all die.
Yeah.
And then the next generation comes in, and they believe the same shit again. Right?
Well, I think it's where we're at in the cycle, or where we were, why Satoshi created Bitcoin. We needed it.
Yeah.
It's like kind of amazing.
Yeah.
I have a theory that it was actually gambling, but I could be wrong. I don't know.
That is what?
It was actually driven by the need to have a gambling currency, is my theory. Because if you think about where do you need that insurance policy on an acute basis the most? He's not going to basically put, in the initial Genesis block, and now I can play poker uninterrupted online. He's going to put, now the chancellor's on the brink of a second bailout. But, it clearly wasn't an academic, because no academic would come up with proof of work. So why would he do it in the first place, or she?
Billy, you could have called it chips then instead of coins.
You never know. We don't know what the discussion was behind the scenes. Why Bitcoin? Why not, poker chips, or, I don't know.
Well, we have it now. Yeah. Did you want to put any questions out to the audience?
I'd love to. You guys have any questions you want to ask? Oh my God, hands going up
straight
quickly.
in.
We have a mic, so he's good to go. Look at him, Josh is on it. What's your name?
Hi, yeah, I'm Tom.
Hi, Tom.
I've flown in all the way from Bedford to see Peter.
Have you really?
No.
Jesus.
See how excited he got?
I thought I would have known you, because Bedford's so small.
There's like 6 of you.
I was in
right?
Bedford recently, but no.
Yeah.
Thanks for doing this event, it's great. Obviously we're at South by Southwest in Austin, and the story of Bitcoin and the backdrop that you've just been talking about is incredible for Bitcoin. Why do you think it is that Bitcoin isn't actually the whole story of this conference as a revolutionary technology, as Twitter was 15 years ago? It seems it's very much on the fringes, and whilst, in a similar way that Roman Abramovich is being demonetised at Chelsea, Peter is starting his own football club funded by Bitcoin. It feels like it's a fringe thing still.
Is he a planted marketer for you, or is it like Bedford?
You paid him, Danny.
I just wonder why it's not more central. Why do you think it's not more central?
It's all about money, right? So everybody here has to work. Everybody here has a job. Everybody here has a company they work for, a product they're interested in, whether it's art, music, educational events beforehand. These are all businesses, right? I mean, why are artists drawn to NFTs right now? We can debate all day whether it's bullshit, whether we believe in that underlying tech, but there's money to be made, right? And so let's not kid ourselves about what's driving all of this. This is a commercial event.
Yeah, but hold on. Bitcoin companies have a lot of money, and if they wanted to cover it, I'm sure they would.
But there's a lot of Bitcoin events going on here, right? I mean,
yeah, but not from the actual central organized South by Southwest.
In fact,
I don't know.
I'm the only Bitcoin panel at South by Southwest.
Okay. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So it's myself and a couple others.
Back to his question. I guess it's a fair question. Why is that then?
Well, so I like John Oliver's quote, the comedian.
He's from Bedford.
Is he really?
Yeah, he's from. I swear to God.
All right,
I don't want to hear the word Bedford.
It's supposed to be a paid advertisement for Bedford. All right. So he says Bitcoin, he goes, this is how Bitcoin feels to normies. Bitcoin is everything you don't understand about money with everything you don't understand about computers. At least that's what it feels like. It feels overly complex. It's kind of this weird pseudo magic money thing. Yeah. So it's hard for people to really grok that, to really understand.
But I'm guessing there's 50 NFT panels happening, right?
NFTs are much easier to understand, or like an Uber. I get in a car, I use it, I understand that. Or an Airbnb, I rent a home. Those are much more translatable new technologies than something that's like, hey, so do you need to know about monetary policy, how decentralization and networking works, and all these other very technical things.
Right.
So I think it's still it's still considered more fringe, because it's very technical conversations versus more fun ones where the tech is easier to understand.
Yeah, it's a good question.
I also just think, I mean, I've made it my mission to help educate people about Bitcoin, and to this day I get questions of why I can't afford one Bitcoin. They don't know that they could buy a fraction of a Bitcoin. They don't understand the idea of hard money, or why there are cracks in the financial system, or how inflation is caused. And so I think even a lot of people who own Bitcoin don't really understand it. And so until that education spreads and until that awareness kind of connects the dots with Bitcoin, I just think, it's not going to have as much attention as it could, because things are more flashy, or you get, 1,000,000% on one of these altcoins, appreciation, and you get faded out.
That's part of why we created this day, right? I mean, it's not Abra Day. We called it Conquer Crypto Day because we wanted to create a day here that was dedicated to this, and this is dedicated to Bitcoin. And we were ourselves a little surprised. I didn't know that there was only one, and now I'm even more surprised. We checked and we couldn't find anything, so we did our own thing.
I saw Parker Lewis has set one up next week on Friday, a whole day of Bitcoin stuff, which is awesome.
Right
so there are things going on around the event, but it's not actually front and center. And given that there's lots of politics and other things here, I don't know, it just feels like interesting.
You have to ask the organisers.
Yeah.
They might not care.
Yeah.
They might have regretted not buying it years ago and hate it. They might think we're all really annoying.
Maybe they're related to Elizabeth Warren.
Maybe it's Elizabeth Warren's son's organising it. I mean, you'd have to ask them, but I mean, I don't know. It seems I was at South by first time like 6 years ago.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense to me. It logically should be part of it.
So, thanks. You want to pass them? Anybody else?
No questions.
There's too many of you not to have a question.
I think we answered everything.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, everything was answered in one panel.
So if anyone thinks of a question, go to the guy with the mic. 5 years ago, I got quite seriously into Bitcoin. And at the time when I was trying to convince my friends, it certainly wasn't with the number of narratives and stories that are around now. It was just kind of like, I just thought it was cool because I was making money. So I just wanted to convince some people. And then over time, I've become better at articulating reasons why people should consider it. And usually it was like, these are the potential risks you face in the future if you don't have it. And it's been very difficult to explain it to people. And I think genuinely, and I probably came across as annoying, it's just like, bunched in with the vegans and the CrossFit people. It's just like, you're one of those people. But now everything's kind of shifted in the last couple of years. And I've found people coming, certainly in the last few weeks, coming in and saying, I could show you my Facebook Messenger. It's mainly people saying, how do I buy Bitcoin? Or what should I do with Bitcoin? It's a real shift. So firstly, have you noticed the same? And what reasons do you think is happening?
I think we've gone through some eras of Bitcoin awareness and adoption to where I don't get these questions anymore. Here's a couple of them. Isn't Bitcoin only used by money launderers and drug dealers? I don't get that question anymore. So that to me represents a step level.
That was the Silk Road era.
The Silk Road era from like,
good times.
I'd say like 11 through 17. That was a very common narrative. Where people would be like, oh, can't you just print more of it? We still get that occasionally, but people are like, oh, I get that there's a finite amount. You can't print anymore.
But someone could recreate one, potentially. That's what I get.
That's the Goldman Sachs narrative of, well, there's so many of them. Doesn't that just mean there's millions of Bitcoin?
It's like saying there's millions
of different Bitcoin.
It's like saying there's a bunch of metals, so gold isn't worth anything.
Right, exactly.
It doesn't make any sense. But I'm definitely seeing those kind of more silly questions start to fade away, and people start to ask more serious questions, which to me indicates better awareness and better understanding of the very, very basic aspects of Bitcoin.
Yeah, I get this. I mean, I run a Bitcoin company, obviously, so I mean, my feed is just all day. It's how do I buy Bitcoin? How is Abra different? I mean, it's just, but it's very different now in 20, 21, 22 versus 17, 18, 19. The narrative has completely shifted. Like, I don't understand this. What is this? To, how do I get started? Can you help me get an account? Like, it's a very different time now. Very, very different time.
Do you find you get a different set of questions, whether it's an individual versus an institution, or they ask?
100%. No, it's very different. Very different. So individuals basically, they want to, they want some Bitcoin, they want some Ethereum, they want to know, should they be holding anything else? How does the yield work? How do I I hear you're paying 9% on dollars. How is it that you're able to do that when my bank pays me 0? And so then we also have a lot of customers in developing markets they're actually buying crypto with Abra using cash. We don't talk about that here in the US because nobody wants that. But we have literally hundreds of thousands of customers who've bought crypto, Bitcoin, in Abra using cash at retail. On the institutional side, our team is over there. They open up institutional accounts all day. It's a very different set of conversations. It's about managing treasury. How much of my treasury should I be putting in stable coins, earning 8-9%? Should we be having exposure on our balance sheet to Bitcoin and Ethereum? Then we deal with funds who are saying, okay, yeah, we're already in Bitcoin, Ethereum. Can you help us with kind of? I know you don't want to talk about this, but what's next, right? And so, a lot of times they end up with just more Bitcoin and Ethereum, right? A lot of times they do end up with, other technology exposure for what's next. And so it's a very, there's overlap, but the why is different for sure. And the thing to remember about institutions, they may come in larger amounts. They're also going to get out faster. And so the thing to keep in mind is that, people who are real hodlers, the trusts, the family offices that are coming in last year, they're not selling right now. They're not, right? When these institutions start coming in, they're going to come in and out like this, right? When they think that there's any perception of risk.
We saw it with Ruffers, right?
Yeah.
I can't remember what their exposure was.
It was enough. Well, it didn't move the market.
No, but it was an indication that once you see like I think they got like a 2-3x. They exited.
Yeah.
And I think this is a great point, though, because 17, 18, 19, even owning Bitcoin as a corporation or a hedge fund or institution was almost unheard of.
It's non-starter.
And now it's like, yeah, it's part of your everyday portfolio. And that's a very big distinction.
Well, not yet,
shift.
but at least that we're having the conversations that it should be or could be.
But a lot of major investors did.
Yeah.
Major investors that are huge names.
Yep.
And so I think they've normalized owning Bitcoin is okay. Yep. It's part of a portfolio. Yeah, I don't think it's...
The last 12 months have been shocking to see the transition from and you know what it was? A lot of it was people who worked at these institutions, I think, were fighting battles to get exposure and it couldn't. And then they'd come to us or Coinbase Pro or Kraken or Gemini, whatever, and end up with some exposure personally. And they're acting as champions in a lot of these institutions, right? So a lot of the top 10 investment banks, we have these meetings like, oh yeah, I use Abra, and they're so happy to take out their phone and show me, to brag that they're using it themselves and are fighting the battle, like, because we're a champion for you guys inside of we want to get it done, and I hear that in almost every meeting, that there's some champion who personally is doing it and is now fighting the battle inside the institution.
So when do you think we're going to have the next big institutional announcement, like a really big one that moves the market?
Well, I think that the Biden kind of executive order helped a lot because it was not heavy-handed at all. It was kind of I tweeted that it was kind of a nothing burger in the sense that there was no short-term risk to anything we're doing.
Yeah.
Right. And that was probably the best we could have hoped for. Clearly, Elizabeth Warren didn't write it, so that's good. And so that's going to help. I think that right now, the institutions who were coming in or looking to come in are either testing, doing research on custody requirements, securities law requirements, and also basically looking at this overhang of what's happening in Russia, in sanctions, and the fact that the markets are a little queasy. But right, if you historically look at invasions, let's talk about conversion again. It's a common theme. If you look at invasions, if you look at times when it looks like we're about to raise rates, both of those have led to significant market gains. Significant. The only exception being, when we started bombing Afghanistan, but that was because we were basically already in the middle of a post 9/11 recession coming off the .com. So, other than that, every major war combined with every major hint of the yield curve looking like it's about to trough has led to an upside capitulation that we have not had.
Yeah.
Right, and so all of that to me says there's a very good chance that when the Burr memes start up again in the next few months, you're going to see significant institutional money coming into the markets, and that's very contrarian to what a lot of people think right now, because people think that this is going to be a dismal year. I think if you look, 20%. I haven't said this publicly before. Almost 20% of our companies in Ukraine. And luckily they're mostly safe right now, and so when I say good year, I'm obviously, I have to caveat that with saying, we have a lot of people who are hurting right now.
Wow.
From a market perspective, I expect this to be, a much better year than people expect, and I'm hoping that, Putin realizes that he underestimated their resolve and accepts a fast way out of that, and that in of itself, to your question, will cause markets to, I think, scream higher.
But because of Bitcoin, if you want to support anyone in Ukraine, there's plenty of Bitcoiners out there running projects. You can donate. Matt Odell tweeted out a humanitarian project where they're taking goods and supplies into Ukraine. So if anyone wants to do that, because we have Bitcoin, we actually have a tool to send money directly into.
What has been the biggest source of donations that is it the U.S.? Is it Europe? I mean, have you heard any details of where the money's coming from?
No, none at all. None at all. I don't know any anecdotal data around that. All I know is we have, as we had with the protests in Nigeria, as we had with the protests in Belarus against Lukashenko, any situation, any part of the world, you can send a liquid asset to people who need it directly. So if it affects anyone, you can do it. You can go onto Google, you can go onto Twitter, you can find projects to support, and I think we all hope a fast exit from this situation. How are we doing for time?
We're good. Did we want to take any other questions or?
Just to Peter's last question, I feel like I don't know if you guys agree, but I feel like I exist in two worlds at the same time. I live on Bitcoin Twitter, which is obviously very well versed in these topics of macroeconomics and bond yields and fund rates and all that. And then I venture out into the normie land, or the no coiners or the curious that maybe are in the consideration mode with Bitcoin. And I feel like there's just a world of difference in terms of like how we view this and how big we believe the problem to be, because everyone outside of this, let's say they don't have Bitcoin yet, they've got jobs like you mentioned earlier. They're busy with families, cost of living's going up, they're in different industries, and you really need to take time in order to understand Bitcoin, and to reach them sometimes is not easy, especially as life seems to get harder and harder. Yep. So I think it's really, I think it just puts a spotlight on how we really need to continue that outreach and bridge that gap, because we want everyone to see the value of Bitcoin, and everyone can do like their part, right, to educate and help bring people on board and educate them on why it's an insurance policy. And so it's funny because I communicate differently depending on which group I'm talking about, and I don't know if you guys feel that way, but
it makes you check yourself.
Well, and it's also not to say this very negatively, but I feel like in the normie world, the no coiners, there's a sense of, especially if they're American, a sense of almost entitlement, or feeling like there's no way the American system that I'm used to is going to crumble. There's absolutely no way. I don't believe that, even if we see the inflation now, we see these crises playing out, that it's actually going to fall, because it never has, and we've always kicked the can down the road. And I think it's kind of conveying that message to them that we are at a turning point, and we are at a potential financial reset, and that's why you need Bitcoin. But how do you translate that message to the average person, right? That doesn't really fully understand that.
Well, you were saying before we went on air, you were talking about the differences between, like, in El Salvador, between going to what do you call it, Bitcoin Beach, and I think it was Esperanza. You were giving the example of where they don't even understand this new Bitcoin thing they've been given, or other parts of the country where people are still a little skeptical.
For sure.
And there's a tremendous amount of education that's going on, and they don't really have any money to save in the first place.
Right. Oh, the concept of saving is just foreign to them. They don't understand the idea of having something that you accumulate and you don't touch, because they need to spend it, and they live in that, they live hand to mouth. And so I think, helping people understand that, obviously number go up helps. Sure. But helping people understand that is really critical.
But to this idea of a kind of a tale of two cities again, I think, and something else we talked about a couple of weeks ago, is this idea of intergenerational wealth, right? So in India, families actually pass on gold from generation to generation, and they consider it wealth, right? I don't know if we have any Indians here who maybe have families that have done this, but they don't tap that wealth, right? They consider it wealth that's passed on, like, I guess, shells and islands hundreds, thousands of years ago that we passed on, right? Or those big rocks they would pass on. But now I think a lot of that wealth is going to move to Bitcoin, and they're going to start borrowing against it. And they're going to basically tap into that wealth using the government issued shitcoins and continue holding the Bitcoin.
Who under the age of being young, like who being young, I don't want to pick an age for that, who being young is going to buy gold?
So
No one's buying gold when they're young. Everyone's buying Bitcoin. We're digitally native.
Yeah.
Like we grew up with cassette players. I'm a millennial, so I grew up with cassette players and I evolved into MP3 players. So this is a native world for me that I understand. Yeah. My age group and younger, for sure, none of us are buying gold. No one's buying gold. It's a shiny rock.
No, I think I disagree.
Okay.
At a time of a time of conflict and a time where commodity prices are going up, certainly countries are buying gold. We've seen China, Russia move to gold. Gold prices going up. Other countries will consider buying gold. I think they may consider a small allocation to Bitcoin, but it's still a $1 trillion asset.
Those
gold
are
is more
countries,
stable.
not
yeah,
consumers.
but what I'm saying is, I think sometimes there's a risk of going all in Bitcoin. I'm considering getting some gold right now, just as a hedge against my asset base, because Bitcoin is also a risk-off asset right now. And if we see the stock market get crushed, Bitcoin might get crushed. And I probably wish I had a bit of gold. So I'm just going to temper that.
Yeah.
Wow.
My kids all own stocks, Bitcoin and gold, and it was their decision. I basically laid out like a framework, and they decided, and they all kind of came to the same decision on their own.
I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just offering like a different.
Well, so I wasn't talking about institutions or governments. I was talking about consumer behavior. Consumer behavior, so I don't disagree with you. Consumer behavior for the younger age groups, it's very rare to see someone who's into gold. And so I was talking about more of cohort-based, so younger generations versus.
But that's always
older
been true,
ones.
hasn't it?
Gold?
Or like I would say the last 30 years, I think that's been true. I don't know a lot of young people who were really into gold
Not a lot of
over
gold
the
bugs.
last 30 years, right? I don't know.
I think we're
Anyway, want to take one more question or a couple more?
Hey there. I know the
Hi.
importance of having good centralized exchanges for onboarding new people to the scene, but especially in light of recent sanctions against Russia and et cetera, how important do you think it is to have real decentralized exchanges where people can kind of move around these sorts of regulations and just be strictly on the crypto scene?
Yeah. So spent a lot of time on this topic. We use kind of some DeFi technology inside of Abra, even though we're kind of a centralized entity. We are a centralized entity to generate yield. It's a small part of what we do. I think that first of all, for Bitcoin, there really is no solid decentralized way to get in and out, right? You look at local Bitcoins, every local government has been trying to clamp down on the lack of what they perceive as necessary KYC or whatever, which for a $50 transaction makes no sense whatsoever, but whatever. You can go buy 10 cups of coffee and it costs you more than the Bitcoin that in my example I just gave you. So I don't think we have a good solid way. I know Square or Block, whatever they're called, is trying to figure out a Bitcoin-based DEX model. I've seen some examples of how this could work using Lightning and state channels and other things, but we're not there yet. Meaning we don't have in the Bitcoin world what Ethereum is doing with the DEX model that I think you're asking about. I'm seeing some cross-chain stuff like Thorchain and others that address parts of that, but not for Bitcoin versus some DAI-like asset. That's the other problem is there's no real stable coins built in Bitcoin right now that have any kind of volume. That was something that we had at Abra years ago. We had a synthetic dollar based on Bitcoin, but because Tether and other coins have become so big, there was no need for it, at least in our world. So you don't really have the other side in a stable coin. You'd have to, by definition, be doing cross-chain transactions, which I think Thorchain is one of the better technologies I've seen examples of that I think is going to become quite big. And maybe there's a necessity out of all of this as to why they become bigger over time. But you're alluding to a technology problem that we totally haven't solved yet. So if you're a budding engineer, this is a good one.
His question, I think, was more on getting in and out of crypto.
Yeah, but it's the same thing, right? So if you're coming from a bank account, there's no chance. Zero chance. If you're in the West, if you're coming from a bank account, forget about it, right? You're going to have to give up information. Do you agree with that?
I agree. And by the way, I agree that like all these other chains have much better DEX infrastructure than Bitcoin. Bitcoin has basically none. But I think the question was like, we're the centralized Abra, and I work at Kraken.
Yeah.
Are these centralized on and off ramps into this unwalled garden? We can do anything we want in this garden, right? The crypto garden.
Yeah.
But I think the question is like, if we get shut down, then how do people get into that garden?
Yeah.
Was that a little bit more of?
Yeah, roughly. Just the importance of it as we see more and more clamp down from governments on this sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, look, the good news is that I see nothing resembling any kind of chance of that happening in the U.S. or in most Western European countries, I'll say right now. But if you're in Venezuela, if you're in Haiti, if you're in Nigeria, actually Nigeria is interesting because there's a lot of cash transactions there, but if you're using a bank account there, it's very difficult, very, very difficult. And the governments are incentivized because of capital controls to keep it difficult. They don't want you basically diluting their currency. They have it hard enough as it is. So I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm just saying that's their incentive. It's not aligned with their own people that they're supposed to be representing. So to me, long term, I want Abra to be it's operating completely in a crypto-centric universe with no integration whatsoever with the traditional banking system. I would love to be there in 10 years. That's not realistic today because the vast majority of people don't have crypto, to your question. So they need that integration with the banking system to get it in the first place. It's the smallest part of our business, but it's the most complicated part of my business. Is every time I touch the banking system, something breaks. Inside, we have no problems, right? So there's no good way around what we have today that I'm aware of. Yeah. All right, we're over time. So do we have time for one more? Jake, did you have a question? My buddy, how you doing?
Hi everybody. I'm humble and grateful to be here, and under as well the guidance and lead of Barhydt. So today I have a question as just part of our African royal family as well, because you pinpoint Nigeria. How, the adoption of Bitcoin, because Africa is usually one of the last continent to adopt when it comes to technology adoption, right? So how the adoption of Bitcoin is going to help us, to be free in this financial colonization of France and all the supreme nation?
I love that question. You want to go first? You understand the question?
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of hope with Bitcoin, especially with places like Africa, because I went to the Oslo Freedom Forum a couple months back, and there were some speakers that were from Nigeria, and they were coming from communities where, again, similar to El Salvador, where I visited a couple weeks ago, Bitcoin was already immersed. They needed it. They needed it so badly because inflation was far worse, the oppression of the government was far worse, and so they were transacting in real time and avoiding remittance fees, and it was something that was actually changing their daily lives, as opposed to here in the US, we almost see it as more of like a savings account, right? We buy, we hodl, we don't want to let it go, we don't want to spend it on anything, whereas in places like Africa, I think there's an opportunity for it to flourish and for it to get to more hands faster because of the everyday use cases and the need for it. So I actually think that that's the opportunity in places like that, and I'm inspired by the people that I meet from nations there where it is being used right now.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I spent a lot of time in Haiti and other hot spots, and moving money around is incredibly difficult, right? I mean, you give an island, small island that gets 30% of its GDP from money transfers from taxi drivers in Miami and Boston and DC and New Jersey and New York City. And 15-20% of that money just disappears, right? Nobody can really explain it because it's not all going to Western Union, it's other hands in the pie, it just seems to disappear. And I think with crypto, Bitcoin in particular, maybe stablecoins have a role until we get there with Lightning. I think most of that money ends up in the hands of the consumers themselves. And that's the really exciting part to me. And at the same time, as people start to save, they're not dependent upon government corruption not being there in terms of preserving the value of their currency. So I think it represents the ultimate insurance policy on the road to freedom, or at least preserving the freedoms that you've developed. We'll see what happens as we come out of this kind of global reset debt cycle that we're in as to what wins. U.S. central bank digital currency, China, some hybrid, some basket, whatever. But maybe Bitcoin could actually be that insurance policy that says, okay, we don't have to accept totalitarian control over some government-backed coin that's going to go to zero and pay 20% in fees to be a cash consumer. And Bitcoin gives us the hope that we need, that we can rely on ourselves to effectively bank ourselves. So, anything?
I'm good.
Cool. All right.
Thank you.
Dan, Natalie, Peter, thank you so much for doing this. Thanks a lot, everyone, for the questions. And to our audience on YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, Twitter, wherever you are, thank you so much. I know we have people watching at 2, 3 a.m. In different countries. I know in Asia, Australia. So thank you all for staying up with us. I know we had a different start time today, so appreciate that. And so those of you online, we'll see you next week on Money Talks. Thank you very much.